Well, continuing with this story, a ground incursion into Gaza appears to be looming, and the U.S. remains steadfast in its support of Israel. But concerns about the humanitarian situation in Gaza are growing. Supplies and aid are running low. Egyptian authorities allowed a third convoy of aid trucks to enter the Rafah crossing from Egypt today, but the border is still closed to people stuck there.
I think there's a lot of factors going into why there's no exit out. We're glad that stuff's going in, but we still want to see safe passage out, and particularly for the several hundred American citizens that we know are in Gaza and want to leave. And Ambassador Satterfield is on the ground working this very, very hard. But there's a number of factors, and I think security, certainly Egyptian officials have spoken to this. I mean, there's they've got legitimate security concerns, and again, we just need to work through that.
Ezzedine Fisher is a senior lecturer at Dartmouth College and a former counselor to the Egyptian foreign minister. He also served as a political advisor to the United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process in Jerusalem. He joins me now. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start in the moment, if we could, of what's happening at the Rafah border crossing. There's been an agreement to let humanitarian aid in with the hope of more going in, but not people coming out in any kind of humanitarian corridor for foreign nationals. Walk us through the situation Egyptian President El-Sisi is in terms of these competing demands.
Competing demands indeed. On one side, President Sisi and the general public in Egypt is very keen on seeing humanitarian aid goes inside Gaza because they identify with the plight of Gazans, and also they don't want this to escalate and turn into a kind of a human disaster that will have a spillover in Egypt. So getting humanitarian aid in Gaza in itself is important for Egyptians, but also it has a political component. And that's the second part of the story about not allowing people out. In normal circumstances, Egypt is willing to allow people out, obviously to travel or to seek health care and so on and so forth. But allowing people out in large numbers as refugees, even if it's so-called momentarily or transitional, is seen with a lot of, worry. And that's mainly because there is a built-in, a drilled-in memory in the Arab world about the Nakba, the disaster of 48, and all those hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who left, thinking they will be back once the conflict is over, never to be allowed back again. And in fact, many of the people who live in Gaza are actually refugees from previous two conflicts. So the idea that you can just leave for a while is really doesn't have a lot of audience, not in Gaza and not in Egypt either.
So we have this situation where obviously Gaza is being bombarded with airstrikes, and the human cost is enormous, and there's increased tension in West Bank. And we've heard from Jordan and Egypt that they're not the places for Palestinians to go should they want to leave. So there is no safe haven for all of the historic reasons you've outlined there, and they're just kind of stuck in this moment.
It is, and it's really tragic. I mean, if you think about it, the civilians are the ones who are bearing the brunt of this entire conflict, and almost every other political player around them is using them either as shields or as bargaining chips. But ultimately, if I live in Gaza and I think about it, most of the people in Gaza didn't even vote for Hamas and didn't choose Hamas and would have liked to have a different life, but they didn't have that opportunity. The last elections, the one and last elections was 2006. That's right, 17 years ago. And yet now they are faced with the air bombing by Israel, and there is no way out and there is no way in. And it's a truly tragic situation. And like any tragedy, the political players, the main players who kind of advance action, each one is following their interest and doing what they think is right, without an external nobody can save this from the fate it's going to, except an external player that has a power, something like a deus ex machina to intervene.
Okay, so Hamas, as you say, they've been ruling Gaza without elections for a decade and a half. And since the October 7th attack, Israel's made it very clear that its goal is to get rid of and eliminate Hamas. Can a military operation like the one we're anticipating, a ground invasion of Gaza, can that root out Hamas? Can they achieve their goal this way?
Look, Israel has tried this route before more than once since 2007, and every time with more forceful interventions and bombing. The cost-led operation led to devastation that Gaza never recovered from. And deterrence works only if the person you're deterring is afraid of the consequences. Hamas doesn't actually, and sadly, doesn't fear the consequences because the consequences do not affect Hamas, it affects the civilians. The leaders of Hamas, Khalid Mashal, was on Arabia TV the other day saying, liberating societies and liberating countries take sacrifice. The Russians, that's the example he used, the Russians sacrificed 30 million people to liberate themselves. That's their mind frame. So the more Israel bombs Gaza, it doesn't mean that they weaken Hamas. So far, 5,000 Palestinians were killed so far. How many Hamas militants we heard? Israel announced that they killed 3 Hamas militants. So frankly, I don't know anybody who sees how this military operation can alone, and the key word is alone, uproot Hamas. To uproot Hamas, you need also a political framework. You need a political path. And so far, that has been lacking.
Okay, so they seem intent on this path, though, and we have no idea where this is going to go. It seems a ground invasion is imminent, though there's some suggestion Israel's being urged to hold off on that for the possible release of hostages, and this is a very fluid situation. Should they go in, they're going to have to occupy parts of Gaza for at least the military campaign. Should Israel succeed in eliminating Hamas within the Gaza Strip, what happens to Gaza after that? I mean, who comes in, who takes over, who provides for the civilians who will be there? Can Israel stay or does it have to get out? What happens the day after?
Excellent question. Thank you for that. Because in fact, if you think about Gaza and how it ended up in the situation where it is today, it's because there was no political path open to it. Back in 2005, when Israel withdrew from Gaza militarily, unilaterally, it did this without creating a political framework. At the time, there was something called the Roadmap for Peace. There was supposed to be reciprocal steps. And withdrawing from Gaza, had it been done in agreement with the Palestinian Authority and with Egypt and Jordan, that could have been a step forward to build Palestinian independence in a peaceful way, and then for a state that would coexist in peace with Israel. But it hasn't been done in this way. It has been done, in fact, in a way that undermined the Palestinian Authority and undermined the position of Egypt and Jordan and put them in impossible situations. So the question today is the same as it was in 2005. Say there is a military invasion of Gaza and say they uproot Hamas, although many people have strong doubts about it. Will Israel be prepared to withdraw from Gaza in a safe and orderly fashion, but in a framework that allows that new Gaza to become a hub for Palestinian independence with steps in the West Bank so that you tell the Palestinians, fine, those were terrorists, there were terrible people, we took them out. There is another path, and that path is a path forward. It's not just surrender. Is this an option? Can you think with the current Israeli government? Although, again, we don't know how Israeli government is going to look like in 2 months.
Right.
But with the coalition in Israel, with the dominance of the right wing in Israel, is this option available? If the answer is yes, if the United States can push for this option for real and get it going, then there might be hope, not just for Gaza, but also for Israel and for the region. If we fall back again to the same cycle and we go back to some half-hearted measures in Gaza and kind of wishful thinking that the threat will go away because Israel has overwhelming power, we will end up in the same situation a year or two down the road. We've been doing this since 2006. That's not the first conflict. Unfortunately, many hundreds of people have been killed before. It does not solve the problem.
So who in that scenario, sir, would speak for the Palestinians? I mean, Hamas, as you say, no election in a decade and a half. It's not much better in the West Bank, where there are protests now against President Abbas's legitimacy. I mean, if Israel wanted to do this, follow this path that you've laid out, who would sit across the table from them? That seems very unclear at this moment.
Yes, it is. But, realistically, if you want to get the attention of Israel, Telling Israel that your partner is the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah doesn't work, simply because the Palestinian Authority is too weak, and because the Palestinian Authority lost Gaza a long time ago. Now, there are reasons for that. The Palestinian Authority will justify and explain. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, they do not control the situation on the ground. So the question is, who does Israel trust? If you want Israel to take risks,
Right.
who does Israel trust as security partners? And the answer is clear. And ironically, they trust their old enemies. They trust Jordan and they trust Egypt. So for anything to happen that is meaningful, that has legs to stand on, you got to get Egypt and Jordan to play a leading role in the security arrangements. That's not easy because those two states are always reluctant, and because the inter-Arab politics kind of make it difficult. But again, everybody has to be kind of pushed and squeezed into it. And that's the part that Arab states have to play. Egypt and Jordan have to play a leading role in assuming security responsibilities if you want this to be stable. But for them to be able to do this politically, there has to be a political deal, a path forward for the Palestinians, so that their intervention is not seen as they are the security guard of Israel, but as the builders of Palestinian independence.
Ezzedine Fashir, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.